Our next story is about potatoes. Potato is a culinary chameleon, simple yet versatile. Potato is the third most consumed food crop. 125 countries grow it. Over 1 billion people eat it every year. But what if I told you that the potato is not a vegetable? What if I told you it's a grain? Would you agree? The US is debating this question as we speak. A Dietary Advisory Committee in America is considering changes to food groups. It wants to make starchy vegetables and grains interchangeable, which means your humble starchy potato could be a grain. Not everyone finds the idea appetizing. Our next report tells you why.
America is grappling with an identity crisis, not of its own, but of the humble potato. Americans love their spud. It's the country's most popular vegetable. An average American eats 120 pounds of potatoes each year. But is it even a vegetable? It's a debate with very deep roots. It started with the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee. This committee has one main task. It gives recommendations to two bodies: the USDA, that's the US Department of Agriculture, and the HHS, the Health and Human Services. They take note of the recommendations, and this helps set up the dietary guidelines for Americans. It's issued every 5 years. Now, these dietary guidelines are not just any guidelines. They influence food policy. They influence federal nutrition guidelines. So they're very important. Usually, they are more of the same. But this time, the advisory committee has a controversial recommendation. It's considering redefining food groups. It wants to make starchy vegetables and grains interchangeable. That would mean disaster for the potato. The potato is a starchy vegetable. If the two food groups become interchangeable, it could be considered as a grain. Of course, it may sound like a small change, but it has big repercussions. It would derail an entire supply chain from farm to table. It would lead to changes in tariffs, in sales, in how it's marketed, and finally on how it's sold. Basically, a lot of chaos. So some US senators are up in arms about it. They may not care about women's rights, but when it comes to the potato, it's all guns blazing. 14 senators have written a letter. It talked about the potato's nutritional benefits, its physical characteristics, and its scientific classification. Essentially, they made the case for the potato to be considered a vegetable. But this isn't the first time the US has waged a war over potatoes. The last one was in 2011. The US Department of Agriculture proposed a limit on starchy vegetables. They wanted to limit it to 2 servings per week in schools. The potato industry hit back. It was backed by senators, mostly from potato-growing states. So the USDA took it back. This time may not be much different. And the potato isn't the only one courting controversy. Take the tomato, for example. At least one person we all know is always ready to remind us that it's a fruit. But the US Supreme Court considers it a vegetable. In the 1880s, the US Congress passed a tariff act. It imposed a 10% tax on vegetables. So some merchants decided to pass tomatoes as fruits. The case went to the Supreme Court, and it ruled that tomatoes should be classified as vegetables. It has happened in India too over the sale of garlic. It was sold in both vegetable and spice markets. The Rajasthan High Court asked the government whether it was a spice or a vegetable, because if it was sold in a spice market, it would have to be taxed like that. So it's not the potato that's courting all the controversy. Classification of food groups have long been a flashpoint, and it's likely to remain so in the future. The humble tuber may divide opinions, but worry not, it won't make your French fry any less tasty.